Hey, welcome to Cokesbury. I'm Anna, and I'm so glad you're joining us today. Wherever you are welcome here, and I'm glad that you found us for this series, I Need a Miracle. My mom and I were on a flight years ago. We were flying from Dallas, Texas to Knoxville, Tennessee. And we'd been flying for a little while. We're getting closer. And, it's the part where the flight attendants start to kind of do their thing and get the plane ready, and you got to put your seatbelt back on. And all of a sudden, we flew into what turned out to be a pretty decent storm. And the plane is doing the thing where it kind of goes up and then it drops down and goes up and drops down. And I always watch the flight attendants in that situation, because if they don't look worried, I think maybe I shouldn't. That didn't even work. The feeling of just constantly dropping over and over again was just, my stomach was in my throat, and I'm just praying like, God, please just let us get close to Knoxville. Please let us be able to get down to the ground. And it's just nerve-wracking, and I'm grabbing the seat, and I'm like looking at my mom, and we're just, kind of nervous because, flying is a little nerve-wracking anyway. So I'd been praying, and we finally get to our descent, and we are coming down. We can see the airport. It's getting closer, and I look at my mom, and I say, I'm so relieved. I've been so worried. I'm so relieved we're about to land. And she looked at me with a straight face, completely serious, and she said, it's the landing that I've been worried about. I'm worried that this strong wind is going to pick up one of the wings of the plane. It's going to hit the ground, and we're going to roll on the runway. And I just sat there looking at her like, are you kidding me? Why would you say something like that? But what I also realized was that I wasn't even praying for the right miracle. I was praying that we'd be able to get down closer to the ground, and she was praying that once we got to the ground, nothing bad was going to happen. It was all in our perception of that situation, but we've all been in those situations where we just feel like, you know what, I need a miracle. I'm going to need a miracle to get through this, but sometimes the miracle isn't actually even what we think it is. Sometimes it's a little different, and through this series, through the stories that we've been looking at in the book of John about these incredible things that Jesus is doing, we've been learning that sometimes the miracle that we want is not always the miracle that we need. We've learned that sometimes you got to surrender. You got to surrender yourself and your control and your perspective in order for that miracle to come. Because as we've been studying in the book of John, we realize that part of the miracle is the presence of God. It's the God of the universe being with us through Jesus, through the power of the Holy Spirit. And in the books of Matthew and Mark and Luke, these incredible things that Jesus does are called miracles. That's what those writers call them. But in the book of John, the one that we've been studying, John calls those things signs. See, a miracle is not like a trick. It's not like something where you're just going to pull a rabbit out of a hat and everybody goes, ooh, fancy. That's not what a miracle is actually about. The miracles of Jesus aren't about being flashy or getting noticed. Those miracles are signs. And what's a sign? A sign just points you to something. When you get to the Grand Canyon, maybe you've driven there from wherever you live, long way, you've driven to the Grand Canyon, and you get there and you don't go, look at this sign. Did you guys see the sign they have for the Grand Canyon? I mean, the font? Who would have even thought of that? This is just a marvelous sign. You would never stand there and just focus on the sign and talk about the sign and look at it. No, you would realize that the sign that says Grand Canyon over there, it's pointing you toward the thing you really want to see, toward the really incredible part, the beautiful thing, the miraculous thing. So that's what the Gospels, and John's in particular, are telling us, is that these things Jesus are doing, these are signs. They're pointing toward something. And the thing they're pointing toward is the love and grace and power of God given to us through Jesus. Last week, if you were with us and watching that series, I want to make sure if you missed last week or any of the others in this series, go back and catch those on the Cokesbury app or on our website. You want to hear all of those. Last week, Stephen talked to us about the multiplication of the loaves and the fish. So maybe you remember that story. There's a huge crowd gathered, and Jesus has been teaching and preaching to them. It's been an incredible time, but then people are getting hungry, and there's not any food to go around. There's not money to go buy food. There's not time. People are hungry right then. So there's this one small lunch of a few loaves and a few fish, and that gets multiplied into more than enough to feed the thousands of people that are there. And that story, though, is not really about bread and fish. That story is about the fact that when you get to the end of yourself, when you get to the end of your power, sometimes that's when the miracle can really begin. It's about the miracle of generosity. So these signs in the book of John show us that God sees us, that God knows our struggle, that God is with us. Those signs point us to how God loves for us, how God cares about us. So today we're going to read about something miraculous, a miraculous sign that we find again in the book of John in chapter 6. Now, where we pick up is exactly at the end of the story that we talked about last week. So what's just happened is that the loaves and the fish have been multiplied. Everybody's been fed. So that's exactly where we pick up in verse 14. It says, when the people saw the sign that he had done, that Jesus had done, they began to say, this indeed is the prophet who has come into the world. So they see this sign, they see this incredible thing that Jesus did to multiply this food, to feed them, and they think, there's something different about this guy. When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea toward Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. And when they'd rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, it's I, don't be afraid. Then they wanted him to take him in the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. So they've just had this amazing day. Jesus has fed this crowd of people after he's been teaching them and preaching to them, and the response of the crowd was they wanted to make Jesus king. And he knew that, but he also knew that wasn't what he was there to do. So he withdrew, as he sometimes did, to go find a quiet place to pray and to spend time on his own with God. And that was an important part of the way he stayed fueled up to do the mission and the ministry that he was there to do. So meanwhile, people dispersed, no doubt carrying this story to all the towns and villages that they had come from. And the disciples are preparing to move on, but Jesus hadn't shown back up. So they get in the boat and they start to go across the sea. They know where they're supposed to go next, so they start to do that. They've rowed 3 or 4 miles. The wind's picking up. The water's getting choppy. And it's stressful. It's a bad situation because they've been rowing and rowing and they're not getting to the other side and the weather's getting worse. And then there's Jesus. It scares them at first, but he comes to them and he reminds them, you don't have to be afraid. And before they can even get Jesus into the boat with them, somehow they've made it to the other side of the shore. Now, it's easy in this story to get caught up on the Jesus walking on the water part. Very cool, really neat thing, not something you see every day. But that's not the main miracle that's at play here. That's the sign. That's the sign pointing us toward the reality of the miracle. Because as John's telling us this story, we notice 2 things about what he's telling us. First, in this story, he never says exactly that the winds died down or that the water got calm. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but that's not one of the things he points out. We also notice that Jesus, it sounds like, never even makes it into the boat with them. Before they can even invite him in, they wanted to, but then they were at the shore. So this sign, this miraculous thing that's happened, points us towards some important things that we need to know about Jesus and us when we are in a storm. Because all of us are in that situation. We all get in those moments where the wind is picked up and the waters are choppy of our life, when things are not going well. And when the waters are rough, what we learn is that Jesus is near. John doesn't tell us that they were in the boat and they're screaming for Jesus. John doesn't say, we're out there rowing and we're like, Jesus, help! Come on, man, where are you? Where'd you go? We need you. We can't get across here. No, it doesn't say that at all. It says that they're just rowing and they're rowing and they're rowing and the wind is picking up. And there's Jesus. The waters were rough, but Jesus was near. We don't have to call on God to come deal with our situation because God is already with us. God knows the situation fully. Jesus came to them. I think sometimes we have this illusion that God is far away and that we've got to seek Jesus out. But God is always here and always ready to be with us when we ask and when we need him. Ready for us to reach out, ready for us to say, yeah, I need help. I can't do this by myself. So if you're in the rough waters, you got to know Jesus is near. But the strange thing that happens is that oftentimes when we're in those rough waters, we don't always recognize Jesus when things are difficult. Jesus was coming to them on the water, and their first instinct was to be scared. Their first instinct is they don't recognize who it is, and they're scared. Now, at this point, you think, shouldn't they have sort of been like, oh, if someone's walking to us on the water, if someone's showing up in the middle of a storm, probably Jesus. Been seeing a lot of this kind of stuff, probably Jesus. No, in the midst of that chaotic moment, they don't even recognize him. Jesus has to reintroduce himself, which is something that happens throughout the Bible. Now, the translation that we read says that when Jesus is with them, he said, "It is I," meaning, hey, it's me. But the closer translation to the original language is that Jesus says, "I am." Now, that would have been immediately recognizable to those disciples because "I am" is the name that God gives Moses about himself when Moses is saying, "Who do I say sent me?" Way back in the Old Testament. Moses is like, "God, I want to do what you're asking, but who should I say sent me?" And God says, "I am." It's a sacred name for God, and that's what Jesus is saying to them. Jesus is saying, "I am. I'm with you. God is here with you." But so often, we just keep rowing. We're just in this bad situation, and the winds are picking up, the water's choppy, and we're just going to keep going. We got our head down, and we're panicked even in those moments when we're in trouble, and we don't even recognize when God's reaching out to us. Think of a time in your life when things were a little out of control, when you were in a tough situation. Looking back now, can you see the ways that God was reaching out to you? Do you see or remember God showing up through a friend or a family member or a song or something that God said at work or church or something in nature, and God's putting people in your life, in your path, reaching out to you? And did you accept that help? Were you always willing to say, "Yes, okay, I see, God's here in the midst of this"? Oftentimes, that's not what we do. We are so focused on the situation that we're in that we don't see God showing up in the midst of it. And some of you are in the storm right now, that you're in the midst of a tough season, of something really difficult happening. And I want to ask you, where are the lifelines? Because God is with you. God is reaching out to you. And sometimes it takes a lot of courage to accept the help that's there. Sometimes the path that Jesus offers seems a little scary. The disciples were afraid. They see Jesus walking towards them. They're scared. And it can be scary to do what Jesus is calling us to do. To say yes to that thing you know God is asking of you, that can be scary. But also sometimes to say no to something that God is telling you to say no to, that can also be scary. But ultimately, in any kind of storm, in any kind of situation, we can trust Jesus because Jesus brings us to safety. Do you remember that in the story, Jesus never even got in the boat? It's not that Jesus got in there and started rowing and everything's just fine. John says that they wanted to bring Jesus in the boat, but immediately they were at the shore. Jesus brought them to safety. We don't know if the winds died down. We don't know if the sea got calm in that moment. What we do know is the most important thing. John says we got to the other side safely. Sometimes the miracle that we pray for is just for the bad stuff to go away, for the bad stuff to not happen, because what we want, often what our number one goal is we just want to avoid the storm. I want the storm to go away. And if I'm totally honest with you, the majority of my prayer life throughout the time that I've been following Jesus has been focused on that. Has been focused on, God, please don't let a bad thing happen. Please let everyone be healthy. Please let us be safe. Please, God. And just this begging of avoidance of all storms. And it's only been recently, it's only been in the last few years that I've started to learn that a life with no storms, a life with no choppy waters, it's not possible. It's not what life is. When we live in a world that has sin, there's going to be pain, there's going to be brokenness. Sometimes bad things are going to happen. Other times really bad things are going to happen. And I think that we get off track when we think we've got to avoid the pain. We've got to avoid the storms. We can't. If we are human people, we can't avoid the storms. It's going to come. And sometimes in our desperation to avoid the storm, we start to medicate ourselves with things. We start to say, the storm is coming, and instead of dealing with the storm, I'm going to try to get around it by not feeling it. I'm not going to feel any of the pain. I'm not going to feel any of the fear. So instead, I'm going to drink. I'm going to use pills, or maybe it's porn you turn to, or online shopping that's become easier than ever during this last year. Maybe it's food that you turn to when you want to avoid that pain or that storm. Maybe it's scrolling on your phone. Have I mentioned your thing yet? If I haven't, you can fill it in right there. We all have things that we do. We all have these avoidance tactics. Now, I want to ask you, have you ever used one of those tactics or any other that have helped you actually avoid a storm? No, because all that does is just mask the pain. Sometimes it even actually makes it worse by avoiding. And sure, there's times when we can make a good choice and we can be smart and wise and avoid harm in our life, and we should do that. But there are other things that are just gonna come. It's a part of life. And sometimes the miracle that we get is a lifting of that storm. The situation gets better, things are improved. There's a miraculous healing, or a relationship is miraculously fixed, or whatever it might be. But a lot of times, guys, the miracle is not that the storm disappears, but it's that somehow God brings us through the storm. The thing that we think for sure was gonna sink us doesn't. The miracle is that in every storm, we don't face it alone. When they were in that boat and they're rowing and they're stressed out, God was with them. Jesus was right there. That's the miracle of our storm, is that we're never by ourselves. God is always with us. God is our safety. And even when all else falls away, when everything that is important is not there anymore. And we've had those moments in our lives when all the things we thought were certain, or all the things we thought were gonna be there forever, just go away or change. But the one thing that didn't change was the presence of God through Jesus, through the power of the Holy Spirit in our life. The sign, the miracle, is that God is with us, that we're not alone. And if you are in a storm right now and you're paddling and you're paddling and you're paddling, I just want to invite you, look up. Just look up. Look up and see that Jesus is here for you. Jesus is coming to you through those rough waters. You're not by yourself. One of the things that I actually love about flying is that sometimes when you take off and the weather on the ground is bad, it's a gloomy day, it's drizzling rain. Sometimes when you fly, you eventually get above the weather. Have you ever had that experience where you're flying and you took off on a gray day and eventually you get above those clouds and above that weather and the sun is up there? And you were sure when you were on the ground that the sun was nowhere in sight. But somehow, just by changing altitude, you realize, oh, actually, the sun's been here the whole time. And you look out that little tiny window and you look down at the clouds below you, and it's a good reminder of the nature of our life. Because once we get into a storm, sometimes it's just all consuming. You're in a tough situation, it's just like storm, that's the only thing you can think about. It's the only thing that matters. It feels like it's happening everywhere. It feels like it's in every situation, that it's never gonna end, there's never gonna be sun again. And what we forget is that storm is a situation. That storm is maybe a season, maybe it's a chapter for us. But that storm is just a circumstance. It's not forever. That the presence of God is not gone. The goodness of God is not gone. Just because we may not feel it in that moment, just because we can't see the light of day right then, doesn't make it not true. Doesn't mean that God isn't there. That storm is a situation. It's not our permanent reality. And oftentimes we're just praying, God, just make it stop. Make the storm stop. I just need it to be over. I want it to be gone. I want to be out of it. But so many times, the miracle is not that God made it stop. The miracle is that God brought us through. You can look back at so many people throughout the history of the Bible and see over and over again in their stories that God brought them through the storm. Sometimes a literal storm, sometimes metaphorical, meaning a difficulty in their life, but God brought them through. You can think of your own story and think of how many seasons and chapters you've been through of things that you thought at the time, this is it. I won't make it out of this. It's not gonna be okay. And you know what? You're here because God brought you through that storm. And if you're in a storm today and it feels like it's just too much, there's no way, you're not possibly gonna come out of this, I wanna encourage you to have the courage to just take one more step and then one more after that. Just do the next thing. You don't have to understand the whole picture. You don't have to know about when that storm is gonna clear. You can just trust that God is gonna be with you to keep taking steps. Look for the lifelines. Raise your eyes up to the horizon and see those points in your life where God is reaching out. If you find yourself in a crisis situation, you reach out to the counseling center. You call that suicide prevention hotline. You reach out to a friend. Or maybe if you know somebody in a storm, you're gonna be that person. You're gonna be that lifeline. You're gonna be the one who says, I see you in a storm and I'm gonna try to meet you there. Because God has chosen not just to work in us, but to work through us. Sometimes you are going to be the thing that someone sees when they lift their eyes up out of their particular storm. You're the person that they're going to see and say, maybe God is here after all. Maybe I'm not alone after all, because I think that God is still in the miracle working business. And the reason I think that is because I've seen it. I've seen it in my life. I've seen it in your lives. And I know there's thousands more stories like them of ways that we came up against something that seemed impossible, that seemed like this was the end of the road. And all of a sudden, we realized that God's been there all along. We realized that God is with us. We realized that we're never going to be by ourselves, no matter how big the storm is, no matter how hard the rain falls, no matter how strong the wind, we're never going to be alone. Because see, the storm may not stop when you want it to. God may not make that storm disappear completely, but what God is going to do is bring you through, and you're never going to be by yourself. Let's pray together. God, when the winds kick up in our life and when that storm is raging, it's terrifying. We are scared. We don't know sometimes which way is up, and sometimes all we can do is just paddle. Just keep going. Just don't stop. Just keep paddling. And God, we don't always recognize you. We don't see you. God, help us to stop and take a breath and realize that the miracle is that we're not alone. And the miracle is that you sent your son Jesus, not just to walk on this earth, but to die for our sins. That you sent the Holy Spirit to be with us so that we'd never be alone for a single second in our lives. So that we would have the strength and the power of Jesus in us. That you would work in us and through us to change this world. To bring a light in those dark moments. God, for people who are listening and watching this morning who are in the darkness, God, I pray that that flicker of light would be visible. That they would feel the hope that comes from the power of Jesus working in us. And God, for those who are watching today that are holding the light, who do feel that hope, help us to shine that into the darkness so that other people would feel it too. So that we continue to spread the message of Jesus throughout this world. Because it's in your son's name that we are always praying. Amen. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope that you will join us again next week as we continue to look at the way God is working in this world right now.